You stand in front of your closet. Half the hangers are gone. The space isn't empty, but it feels hollow. No sound, no demands. No shared calendar waiting for your sink. You don't cry, you don't scream. You just stare at the place where his coats used to be, as if your own shape had been hanging beside them this whole time. There's no one to ask what's for dinner. No one to check in with before making plans. And for a moment, you realize you don't know what you want, because no one is asking anymore. It doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like being untethered. Not grieving a person, grieving a role. Not missing him. Missing who you were when someone needed you. You didn't wake up the morning after your divorce and feel different. You made the coffee the same way, checked the weather, wrote a to-do list out of habit. You still thought in plural, what we needed, what we might do this weekend. Then paused, remembering there is no we to check with, to check. Your phone is quiet in a different way now. Not absent, just unanchored. No one to update. No one to narrate the small, invisible parts of your day to. You go to the store and still reach for the brand he liked. You fold the laundry in half before realizing there's no second drawer to fill. No one talks about the after. How long it takes for I to stop feeling like a grammar mistake. How many decisions feel illicit just because no one approved them. People ask how you're doing. You say fine. What else is there to say when the grief isn't about love lost, but purpose diffused? You weren't miserable in the marriage. You were consistent, reliable, predictable. You wore the role like second skin, smiled in the right moments, softened when he tensed, became intuitive enough to predict what he needed before you ever got around to yourself. That wasn't sacrifice. That was muscle memory. Now you sit in the quiet and realize how few of your days were actually yours. You didn't resent it. Not at first. You thought that's what love looked like. Until love left and the structure collapsed and you had no idea where to begin. There is no blueprint for unbecoming. No ceremony for stepping out of a role you were rewarded for perfecting. You miss being a wife in the way a tree might miss being a ladder. Not because it was right, but because it was used. This didn't start with divorce papers. It started with erosion, the quiet disappearing of your own name beneath the weight of being essential. You didn't lose yourself. You were applauded for giving her up. They said you were patient, flexible, a natural partner. You knew when to speak, when to soften, when to shift the conversation back to him. They called it compatibility. You called it love. But it was fusion, a slow adaptation. Not to who you were, but to who he needed you to be. At first, it felt romantic. Two lives blending into one. Two dreams stitched together. But one dream faded faster. And it was always yours. You adjusted. You downplayed your preferences until you forgot they had sharpness. You quieted your restlessness until it sounded like peace. You bent so well that even now, you can't tell if you're choosing or accommodating. You don't know if you like red wine or just got used to pouring it. You don't know if you enjoy hosting or just got good at appearing gracious. Your identity was absorbed by efficiency, by emotional labor, by routines that made you useful and forgettable at the same time. Now the house is still. No one is asking. No one is watching. And for the first time in years, you have space to want something without editing it. But the muscle that knew how to want it atrophied. What once protected you is now quietly limiting you. You became someone lovable by becoming someone else. Now that no one needs you to play her anymore, you don't know who's left. Because the fusion didn't happen overnight, and neither does the separation. You didn't forget yourself. You faded on purpose, to keep things whole. And now, they are whole without you. And you're the one who feels incomplete. You didn't build your sense of self from within. You built it through reflection, through the way his shoulders dropped when you said the right thing, through the way the kids calmed down when you stepped in, through the way people said, how you do it. You were seen only when you were solving, admired only when you were absorbing. You were necessary, not for who you were, but for how you functioned. That's how your worth became performance, and performance became identity. When the marriage ended, you didn't just lose a partner, you lost the mirror. Now, there's no one to bounce off of, no one to interpret your value through gratitude, through relief, through their needs being met. You do something kind, and no one notices. You keep the peace, but there's no one to calm. You wake up, and there's no reason to rush. You begin to understand how invisible you've become even to yourself. Nora Ephron once wrote, "You lose a marriage, and then you lose the map, because marriage gave you coordinates. Even in compromise, there was direction. Even in frustration, there was motion. Now, there's space, so much space. But space without reflection feels like floating. You thought you'd feel free. You feel undefined. This is the mechanism that lingers. You became a wife, not just through ceremony, but through feedback. Now the feedback is gone, and your shape feels soft around the edges. Not because you're lost, but because no one is there to echo you back into form. You're not grieving the man, you're grieving the reference point, and without it, even the smallest decisions feel dissonant. You're used to adjusting. Now you have nothing to adjust to. And that doesn't feel like clarity. It feels like erasure. You thought you'd get your life back later, after the kids were grown, after the house was paid off, after things calmed down. You postponed your preferences like they were indulgent, like wanting joy without earning it was somehow disloyal. You told yourself there would be time. And now, suddenly, there is. But instead of feeling expansive, it feels disorienting. Like you arrived early to a version of yourself you never learned to meet, because permission was always tied to others. What they needed, what they could handle, what made sense for the whole. Now that the whole is scattered, you're left holding the clock you kept setting back. You try to do the things you said you missed, painting, reading, traveling alone. But they don't land the way you imagined, because you weren't just waiting. You were rehearsing invisibility, and now it's a habit. This is the system that shaped you first. You fused to be accepted. Then you served to be recognized. And all the while, you delayed. To be good, you became the center of everyone else's gravity, the emotional hub, the logistical net, the glue. You thought it made you strong. But strength without self is structure, not identity. Now the structure is gone, and you don't know how to stand without holding something together. You weren't just a wife. You were a role, an archetype, a collection of compromises sewn into one competent shape. You told yourself you were patient. You were just postponed. And when people say, "At least now you can do anything," you want to scream, because they don't realize how long you've been disappearing while waiting for your own life to begin. You didn't leave suddenly. You left after staying too long. That's what no one prepares you for. Not the leaving, the unlayering. Because after you've given everything away slowly, you forget what it's like to claim something without apologizing for it. And now, every choice feels like trespassing in your own future. Moment number 1, recognition. You're not afraid of being alone. You're afraid of being unmirrored, of living a life that no longer makes sense because there's no one to reflect it back. You walk through the house, not sad, not angry, just unreferenced. No one is there to notice if you're late, if you don't eat, if you fall asleep with the light on. The silence isn't heavy, it's weightless, and that's what makes it terrifying. You used to revolve around the needs of others. Now your time is yours, and you don't know where to place it. There's no structure to push against, no resistance to define you, just open space and no instructions. You realize you never hated the marriage. You hated how it became your compass. And now, without it, you have no direction. You weren't scared to be without him. You were scared to be without function. Moment number 2. Exposure. You look back and see it clearly. You didn't stay out of love. You stayed out of momentum. The habits were so well worn, they felt like home. But they were just muscle memory, dressed as devotion. You were praised for your resilience, but resilience is easy when the alternative is rebuilding. You went numb for convenience. You smiled for peace. You carried the weight because it was easier than naming the emptiness underneath. Now, you replay the nights you didn't speak up, the weekends you went along with, the dreams you put in a box labeled someday. And you can't tell if the grief is about what ended or about how long you disappeared inside something that looked like love, but was mostly routine. You didn't notice yourself leaving, because it happened in small negotiations, little silences, micro abandonments. Not dramatic, just cumulative. This isn't strength. It's practiced absence. You realize you were never really seen, only interpreted. And now that there's no one left to interpret, you finally feel how invisible you became. Not all at once, but slowly, lovingly, compliantly. And that's the part you can't unsee. You didn't just leave a marriage. You left a version of yourself you performed so well that even you believed it was who you were. You weren't just a wife. You were a system, a structure, a story held together by compromise and consistency. You didn't fall apart when it ended. You paused, because without the rhythm of being needed, you couldn't hear your own voice at first. The ache isn't about the person. It's about the shape you wrapped your life around, the rituals, the roles, the version of womanhood that rewarded your disappearance with stability. You thought the divorce would be the rupture, but the rupture was internal. It happened quietly when you realized you had no practice being fully yours. You thought the grief would be about loss, but it's about translation. Learning to speak without editing, to want without filtering, to move without narrating every step for someone else. You thought you were starting over, but you're starting for the first time. Not reclaiming, becoming. There's no script, no applause. Just an unfamiliar lightness that doesn't feel like freedom yet, but doesn't feel like collapse either. You thought leaving would feel like failure, but staying had already ended you slowly. You're not unbecoming a wife. You're releasing the performance that was never meant to last this long. This isn't reinvention. It's return. To the voice that went quiet, to the girl who paused her life in order to support someone else's. You look in the mirror now and don't recognize what you see. That's not a crisis. That's clarity. You didn't fail the marriage. You fulfilled the role, down to the last invisible detail. You kept the peace. You held the weight. You made it livable, even when it slowly erased you. You stayed until the script wore out. And when it did, no one handed you a new one. Just silence, just space. People call it freedom. But blank space isn't freedom at first. It's vertigo. Because for years, your choices were calibrated around other people's needs. Now, your life is only yours. And no one tells you how heavy that can feel after a lifetime of being essential. You were the framework. Now you are the question. The after is not louder. It's quieter. And in that quiet, you start to hear yourself think in a voice that was always there but never centered. You didn't leave a marriage. You left the version of you who thought being chosen meant being useful. Now, you're not useful. You're real. There's nothing to fix. Only something to meet. And she's been waiting longer than you realize. Stay curious. You haven't met all of you yet.